How can you do all that needs done in life and still pursue your desire to learn French or the guitar or grow a plant or make art? You can't put a fiddle under your pillow and wake up playing it. Though how cool would that be? But one thing we can do, no matter how chaotic and overwhelming life can be, is know that every tiny small motion in the direction of those endeavors really do matter. And not only that, they add up over time with great momentum. Join me, Fain, as I interview painters and gardeners, designers and musicians, photographers and cooks, creative livers of any kind who have somehow, in the middle of it all, continued on their creative paths, no matter what. This is Fain House Radio, and I'm so glad you're here.
I'm Hannah Levin. The main creative endeavors of my life, I would say I have kind of three aspects to that. One is visual arts, one is music, and one is healing arts. And so I see those three as being very pivotal in my life, each one kind of taking on predominance at different points in my life. So for visual art, I focused mostly on pottery and making functional sgraffito pottery. With the musical arts, I was a singer-songwriter for several years and really enjoyed the expression of writing songs and playing music. And then the healing arts, which is more what I'm focusing on at this point in my life, which is Ayurveda and yoga. And I feel like they all fuel me in different ways.
And you're also building your own small business, which has creative aspects too.
Absolutely. Yes. The entrepreneurial journey is creative beyond measure, for sure.
You grew up in a rural creative community in Western North Carolina. How was that for you?
I think it was really wonderful. And I think a lot of my perspective on it now comes in retrospect, because when you're growing up, you don't really realize what you have. I mean, you and I grew up very similarly, you in the Brasstown folk school community and me in the Penland CeeLo community. And I grew up surrounded by creative people and really intelligent people who were, a lot of them, very consciously choosing their life in terms of what, where they lived, how they lived, what food they were eating, how they spent their time and energy. And I really appreciate that in retrospect, just growing up around a lot of artists and musicians, and even just like back to the landers, people that were questioning the direction that society was going in and were interested in creating a different world, specifically like the CeeLo community, which I grew up on the outskirts of as an intentional Quaker-based community. I think planted a lot of seeds for me in terms of creating empowering myself to create a life that I really enjoyed and felt like that had a lot of integrity to it.
So it was sort of like a mix between them encouraging and supporting that in you, with also seeing with your own eyes them model that it could work and that it's possible to live that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was a combination of both, and that my life was really not very influenced by pop culture either, which is interesting because it gets me in trouble sometimes. I'm pretty clueless. I tell people I seem normal on the outside, but you start getting to know me and like there's so many like pop culture references, or like I know a lot about some more like random things. I grew up listening to the old blues and ragtime and folk music and, things that my dad played and listened to in klezmer, but totally clueless about any music from the 80s, like when I was growing up, things like that. But I think it's really benefited me in a lot of ways too, to have that perspective not steeped in popular culture.
Yeah, it's like worth the odd, funny feeling when you don't understand the cultural pop reference.
Right.
I'm with you on that. I remember the first tape that I ever bought with my own money was at the Chattanooga Folk Festival, and it was a klezmer source recording. And I loved that tape so much, but I don't think that my friends understood Why?
Right.
Did you have a moment in your adolescence where you pushed against or rejected some of how you were growing up and the things your parents were sharing with you? Or did you feel like you kind of always liked it?
No, I definitely pushed against it. And I mean, I have a big regret specifically around music growing up with my dad, who is a very skilled musician, especially with old time music, that I had this attitude of like, oh, that's silly dad music. And I really didn't learn to play old time until I was in my 30s. And so much regret there. Like, oh man, I grew up in a household with somebody who's like a rock star old time guitar player, and I didn't want any piece of it. So, that's just one example, but I think, in some ways I really aligned with it, but I really think it took me leaving home to appreciate where I came from and the values and opportunities that my parents gave me as a child that were really unique.
Well, that does make tons of sense. And when you left home, you saw all kinds of other options that are out there.
Yeah.
And you had something to measure against a little bit, mixed in with you being you and learning how to be you, and also where you came from. How do you feel like, in hindsight, of course, that kind of childhood informs where you are now, the work you do now, the way you see things now?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that I think stands out a lot is that I grew up without television, and not even having a television in the house, I think really predisposed me to think about my creativity and my time and my ambition in different ways, because there wasn't like, oh, at some point peace out and watch the television, or numb out or something. So I think in a big picture way that really informs the drive and focus that I have. Like, I really want what I do in my life to make a difference for other people. I see us as interconnected, and that may come in part from growing up in an intentional community area, that awareness was there. And now I think it really is this balance of knowing that I have creative expression that I really enjoy, and how does that balance out with my aspirations as an entrepreneur, or in the, like, now I own an online business, right? So that balance of being on a computer, but then also like keeping my hands in the clay, you know, like not losing the touching of the earth.
It makes me think about our computers and technology, our creative tools in so many ways. At the same time, when we have our hands in the clay or pick up a guitar, it feels so different, even a little bit spiritually different. How would you describe that difference? The fact that
Mm.
they're all creative things. Why does having our hands in something feel so different and make us feel so much more connected than typing on a computer?
Yeah, I think there's a tactile presence that is there when you're, especially like, so, if I go into my studio and I throw a bunch of pots, there's something that's very clear that I have created. You can look at it, you can see it, you can touch it. And it's also using my body in a different way, and my mind in a different way, and my sensory organs in a different way to throw a pot. And same with playing music. I mean, I believe that we are so multifaceted in who we are as humans and what we can experience in our lives, that we need that variety to be fully alive. That if we just spend all of our time creating on a computer, staring at a screen, there is something that's lost. I was very affected by Paulus Berenson as a child. He was an elder in my community. He describes himself as a deep ecologist, somebody in service to the monastery of the hand, that the handmade is something that is worthwhile and needed in our world to create a human experience and to connect us all. I feel like I learned so much from him in his understanding of that and movement, and how we understand how our bodies are impacted by the activities we do, how we paint a painting or dance or, create anything with any material. It's very different than being on a computer. And I believe that's really important for all of us. And it's something that I strive for in my own life, to not totally let go of those creative outlets in the handmade.
It's amazing and lucky and wonderful that you had Paulus in your life in childhood and for so many years. I met him 2 times, and only in those short little moments, of a couple of hours, he totally changed me. And so for you to have that golden time with him is so cool. I remember him talking about always having a poem that you've memorized in your back pocket that you could always say when you might need to say it. The last time I saw him, he came into the studio where I was a studio assistant at Penland with Mary Oliver. I just about fell out of my chair. The way he would talk, the way he would think, weren't his more formative years in the 60s, and he danced with Martha Graham and things like that.
Yeah.
And the idea of
Ernest Cunningham
making things with clay that had seeds in them and not firing them so that you put them back in the earth and let the rain wash them back into the earth and all of that. I'm so glad you're mentioning him, because it's really interesting to think about, how did he do that? How did he have that kind of magic to change me within a couple hours and change you over your childhood? What do you think that is? What magic is that he had?
I think it was a lot about presence and slowing down to notice, to receive. Yeah, poetry and movement were very key for him. And even handwriting, he would spend, I felt like his whole motto was kind of like, slow down and really immerse yourself in the task at hand. And yeah, he was very instrumental in, I think in many ways, like understanding the importance of creating with the hand. He was always very supportive of me doing yoga and body work, and then connecting with nature and poetry. I don't know what his particular magic was, but I think it was his passion that he was willing to share it with other people. And he was sometimes criticized for it. It wasn't that everybody received it so warmly, but I think he knew it was important, and that our world was getting farther and farther away from understanding the connection of the heart and the hand. And he wanted to be a voice for that.
I think that's a great point, because it takes a lot of time and energy and generosity to share that much with so many people. Met so many people through each year by being connected with Penland. And it's interesting, the idea of keeping it to yourself versus sharing to people that want to hear.
Yeah. And I think he really felt like it was a duty, something he had to do.
Sometimes if you really love multiple things, we're told you really should pick one. That happens to a lot of people. And what you were just saying about the difference between working on a computer versus playing music versus making something with your hands, that we're multifaceted. And so different things are going to touch the different parts in us, and that's a good thing. And we don't have to pick one. At the same time, we have to make sure to not go cuckoo with like too many things that we're not actually honoring and spending time to learn and that kind of thing. And somebody like Polis, he totally did all different kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he could connect modern dance to clay very directly
Right.
and easily. So how has
Yeah.
pursuing multiple mediums played out in your life?
Well, I think it's been very cyclical in a lot of ways. I know you and I have talked about this kind of feeding the triad of the visual, the movement, and the musical in different ways. And it's really a balancing act, I think, in many ways. If I look back over my life so far, I've pursued each of those as my main career at different times. I think one of the things that is really interesting in our culture is the commodification of skill, and that a lot of people see it as the highest compliment to say, oh, you could sell that, or if you made a bunch of those, I would buy them, instead of just appreciating, like, oh, wow, you're skilled at making something. And when we turn something from an outpouring from our hearts into a commodity that then becomes something that we rely on for a livelihood, I think it changes it. So I feel like I've danced in and out of that relationship with every art. So, for a while I was a full-time studio potter, and it really changed my relationship with making pots. I felt like I was more of a machine than a creator. It wasn't like, what do I feel inspired to make today? It was like, I got to crank out 50 mugs. There's galleries waiting and, a show coming up. And it was very different for me. And same with music, when there was pressure to have new songs for this gig, or, I'm going to put out an album, or I like being in a place where we have abundance in terms of the support that we have, financially and energetically, for the lives that we want to live, and to not surrender our creative juice, or our creative enthusiasm to the marketplace so readily. And I think that's something that I've had to learn in different ways. I mean, now my life is that my pottery and my music are absolute hobbies, which means I don't spend as much time doing them too. And they are for me, or they are for, like, I can go to my pottery studio and say, what do I feel like making today? Or so-and-so's birthday is coming up. What would be really fun to make for them? And then every once in a while, somebody will contact me and say, hey, I bought a mug from you years ago. Could I get 2 more or something? And I'll say, sure. And that's just where I am right now. I think part of it is like trusting the cycles. I wonder if, in 20 years, I'll be like, okay, I've kind of built this whole career and business in the health and wellness industry. And now I really just want to be in the pottery studio, or just really want to be playing music. That I trust the cyclical nature of the creativity to know that we're not done with the conversation yet.
It's like you're also trusting your love of those things too.
Right. And I think that's where that message of choose one thing has always frustrated me. I don't want to choose one thing. I believe that I can be multi-passionate and multifaceted and have skills in lots of things for the rest of my life. And there's even more that I want to learn. And I meet people all the time that say, oh, you're like, how are you so skilled? Or how are you so multi-talented? And I say, first of all, I grew up without a television. And second of all, that I'm tremendously curious. Very interested, and this kind of goes into the health and wellness work that I do now. I'm very interested in our potential as humans, and in living that out for myself. I'm modeling that for the people that work with me too, that I believe that the more facets we have of exploring what it means to be alive, the richer and more fulfilling our lives will be. I'm excited about it.
So we were talking a little bit about motivation. Where does that motivation come from inside of us? Would you say that really deep, pure curiosity is one of your motivations?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think I learned a while ago, maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago or something, this one little fact that kind of changed how I looked at things, which is that humans are most happy when they're learning something, when we're expanding our sense of who we are and what we're capable of. As somebody who struggled quite a bit with anxiety and depression in my 20s and even into my 30s, I see that as being a really key piece in our healing, is allowing ourselves to grow and to learn and to not be held prisoner to any label of who we've been in the past, or a job identity, or our certain labels we will give ourselves, our position in life, whatever that may be. And yes, that's part of our human experience, but to constantly be saying like, well, who can I be next, is really exciting.
It just makes me think about, you've witnessed in me a couple of times, like a certain stubbornness, like, no, I'm not doing it that way.
Mhm.
And then you're like, okay, well, I love you anyway. And then time goes by and I'm like, okay. And eventually I'll like crack and shift and change. And, and I'm so curious what is behind that sometimes. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's not. But sometimes it's just hard to imagine ourselves in different ways. That just takes a minute.
Right. So it's like planting the little seeds to start to imagine, like, what would it look like to have a podcast, right? Like you made that big jump. And I mean, I think of you, Annie Fain, as somebody who, I see you as a real model in my life, as somebody who's willing to not be like, I have to get the whole project done in one sitting or I'm not going to do it at all. Like, you're such a great model for 15 minutes a day, or just a little bit every weekend. I think of some of the sewing projects you were doing when your boys were really little, and it was just like you just needed something to keep your hands knowing that they're making hands, as you were doing all the mama things. And you gave that gift to yourself in these little spurts of time, and you just plug away at it. And then, a few months later, you'd be like, look at this beautiful skirt that I made, or look at this amazing thing that I painted. And it's like, what? Like, that just happens from a little bit each day. And, I remember when I was first learning to play guitar, and my dad just kept saying, just 5 minutes a day, Hannah, just pick up your guitar 5 minutes a day, leave it out somewhere where it's really easy to pick it up, even if it's just 5 minutes a day. And it makes a huge difference, just keeping your foot in the, whatever, your hand in the pot, or your toe in the river.
That's one point of this podcast, is just general encouragement to folks that the small moments really do matter.
Absolutely.
And we have to just squeeze it in here and there, because that's actually just how life is. And we have to accept it. And then how do we know it's okay to just squeeze some of those things in there, and that it changes us over time?
Yeah. And that the hard parts are part of the journey too. The pieces where we feel stuck, or we feel uncertain, or we feel like our understanding of things no longer fits our new reality, that those pieces are what ends up fueling us into our next evolution or the next inspiration. That's part of the journey. It's not necessarily a sign to pack up and go home, to quit.
Yeah, that there's good stuff on the other side of pain sometimes, or just because it hurts doesn't mean it's bad, and that kind of thing. Speaking about music and challenging feelings and going through the pain through the other side and all the different phases we have in our lives, I know that you've had a rainbow of feelings about music in your life, and you've spanned from dealing with insecurities on a stage all the way to being on the radio. And I was wondering if you would speak a little bit about that journey, because I know for any of us, we might have a medium or an instrument or a language that we're struggling with, and it helps to hear stories a bit like that.
Well, I guess I want to preface my story by saying I don't feel like I've arrived at any place, but again, it's like the cyclical nature of being involved in creativity. So yeah, I mean, I think music has always been something where I've felt both it's been a form of expression in a way that I haven't felt in other areas, and a place of insecurity for me in that I haven't really ever studied music. And there's a lot that I don't necessarily understand. I can play lots of things that I don't understand, but I also am a very basic musician in a lot of ways. And yet there's that poetry piece, like putting words to music, that felt so fulfilling to me. And so for many years, I was writing songs, and I released 2 albums, and yeah, I've been on the radio, and I was, one of the top picks on WNCW for the regional album of the year, and in 2012. And all of those things are so powerful. And then there's also the kind of intimate relationship with music. And I was married for a brief time to somebody who was incredibly critical of me musically, and how I let that impact my self-concept or my relationship with my music. And that was something that I really had to come to terms with, is like, that's my relationship with my music. It's not anything that anybody else can have a say in unless I let them, which I did for a time. Yeah, it was a process of, I did stop playing music for quite a while, and then really needed to re-engage with it on my own terms. And I was grateful to be living in Brasstown at the time and have several wonderful supportive musicians, Bob Dulcimer being one of them, who was willing to, hang out with me and play music. And you were, you're like, let's sing some songs, and, really welcoming that voice and that music to come back out again. I think there's so much about relationships that tie into playing music too. Most of us don't play music in isolation. We're playing music with other people. And whether it's that, for a long time, I played music with my dad, he performed a lot with me. And so there's a connection there that's really sweet that I really appreciate, especially as he ages. And, it's longer periods of time in between when we're able to play music together. That's a sweet connection. And so really focusing on those connections that are what I want to cultivate via music versus the more critical voices or insecurities, I think can be really helpful. It's like, where attention goes, energy flows, like put your sights on those connections with the activity that feel really yummy and nourishing to you. And the other stuff doesn't need to matter so much.
And the thing is, with music and dance as mediums, it's like vulnerable in a different way because you're just putting your body out there. If you do a painting, you can be alone for a minute and then you share it.
Or like with a painting or a piece of pottery, you can like watch people looking at it. Whereas if you're on stage, you're who is being looked at, and you're sharing what has been created. And that feels really vulnerable. I remember hearing an interview with Martha Scanlon that was really pivotal for me. Somebody asked her about feeling nervous on stage. And I used to get horrible stage fright, and I don't perform now. So I don't know what my stage fright level is right now. But she was talking about how it really shifted her perspective when she thinks about allowing the music to flow through her instead of it being about her, that she allows herself to be a conduit. I feel that way as a yoga teacher now too. It's like I arrive at a practice to say, may this practice flow through me. And it's not about me. It's not my ego or my need or whatever that's showing up. It's may whatever flows through me be a gift to whoever's present here. And that really helped shift my relationship with performing music, was to just be like, all right, I'm a conduit for this sound, for this message, for this emotional experience, and may it benefit the people who are present. And that, I guess, also ties into, my more spiritual path with yoga and meditation, Ayurveda too, is that it's like getting out of the way for the bigger connective experience is really what's appealing to me.
How did you come upon Ayurveda? It clearly has overlapped with the other things you were also doing, sometimes in unexpected ways.
Yeah. So I taught yoga for I don't know, 10 years before I really dived into Ayurveda. So Ayurveda is the medical science associated with yoga, and Ayur means life and Veda means knowledge. So Ayurveda means the knowledge of life. And I like to explain it as the owner's manual that none of us ever got. How do we understand our unique way of being in this world? So from an Ayurvedic perspective, we all have unique constitutions informed by 5 elements. How it ties into the creative process for me is I feel like it's really informed who I am. Like understanding my constitution has given me great insight into how I can express myself most powerfully and usefully in the world. And that feels, there's just more alignment there, I guess. So my business is called Heartfelt Wellbeing, and the ART in heart is capitalized. And really what I see as this journey of Ayurveda is to make our lives a work of art, is to be able to have creative license to be like, what am I here to do? And what is this journey? And what can I make of it that is inspiring and enlivening and expansive? Ayurveda has been a huge gift to me, and I lead 2 groups now online for women who are studying Ayurveda, and it is a total honor and pleasure to facilitate and witness their growth through learning this too. So while it's not a craft per se, I'm honing a different kind of craft in that work. But I came to Ayurveda through my own health struggles. I was diagnosed with a precancerous condition, which was kind of the wake-up call. But previous to that, I had been struggling for years with chronic allergies and insomnia and horrible PMS and, all sorts of health issues. And it was really once I found Ayurveda, I was like, oh, I understand why these are the things that I've struggled with, and that I could heal them naturally. I mean, with changing my diet and my lifestyle and working with herbs. And then I was just like, other people need to know about this. So I went back to school for Ayurveda, but I really credit Ayurveda with kind of saving my life. I don't know if I was kind of dying inside, I guess, before I found it. Just lots of inflammation, anxiety, depression. And those are all things that I think to the external world weren't so obvious, but it was really challenging to be inside me, and life is a lot more easeful now.
One of the programs you're talking about is called Vitality Circle, a program that you offer.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Vitality Circle is a year-long program for women that I started 3 years ago. And it's really based on daily practices of our rhythms of the day in terms of how we're eating, when we're eating, waking up before the sunrise, letting our energy build with the solar energy of the day, finding time for sitting in silence and nourishing our senses. And this is really one thing that I've really tuned into through Ayurveda is the sense organs of really caring for like our eyes, our ears, mouths, our nose, like to really be able to keep our sense organs acute and happy so that we can experience our creativity with more richness and depth. So anyway, the Vitality Circle, we go through these 10 habits for each season. And really the 10 habits are these gateways into a deeper connection with the self. So while aligning with these habits, once they're in place, really clears what I call dis-ease, which is the opposite of ease. So it's any ways our bodies have gotten out of balance, whether it's dealing with insomnia or weight gain or autoimmune diagnosis or whatever it is. It's like those things have just arrived in our lives because we've gotten off the path of ease. We've been making decisions unknowingly most of the time that have led us to a place where we're not functioning optimally. And we can make decisions once we're informed of how we function best to get back on the path of ease and away from dis-ease. So the vitality circle it just blows me away. Like the transformation that I see the women in that program having is such an honor and is mind blowing. You know, people reversing diagnoses, getting off of medications, losing lots of weight without dieting. I mean, it's beautiful. It's really where I see that I grew up in this kind of alternative lifestyle, and I see that I'm able to bring an alternative perspective through this work to people that haven't had that before, to say there's a different way and it doesn't have to be hard. It can be really gentle and supportive. And part of what I do in the Vitality Circle is build community. But it's a really supportive community that holds people accountable and, really witnessing. And the whole point of it is to change. A lot of times people get into relationships or into groups or whatever, and then people are shocked if somebody changes. This community is built around everybody's trying things constantly. So it's really cool. So the Vitality Circle is set up on seasonal basis. So we open the doors at the beginning of every season for that. And you can learn more about that on my website. It's heartfeltwellbeing.com. And then I just launched a brand new program last month called Evolve, which is a 6-month program. And we just meet twice a month. So it's a little more low key. I'm super excited. So it's really fun. And I incorporate creative expression into what I do in the Vitality Circle, which is really fun. And I feel like that is healing for people to open up, whether it's singing or making certain drawings or collaging or whatever it is.
It's so fun because your voice gets so excited when you're talking about what you are working on right now. And that means you're getting so much out of it too. And it's like a beautiful loop is happening.
Yeah. I mean, I so love what I do. And there is something that feels fulfilled in me in making a business of helping people be healthier that wasn't fulfilled by making pottery or just teaching yoga or playing music. Although I feel like all of those things help people be healthier in their own ways too. But Ayurveda just feels like this whole nother level. And really, it's not just Ayurveda, but it's these programs that I've built that are these in-depth journeys. Because you could go to an Ayurveda practitioner and have a consultation and that would be the end of it, right? But that it's dynamic group experience of evolution that just feels so exciting to me.
Are there 3 things you could share with people listening that they could try in honor of managing their energy and how they feel through the day? Because it's true, when we aren't feeling very good, even if it's mild, that's a barrier between us and inspiration. It's a barrier between us and sharing our work. It's a barrier between creative thought.
Yeah, that's so right on. And I think living this Ayurvedic lifestyle has really allowed me to kind of proceed in the world with more confidence in what I'm doing. And it is so fun. So it's hard to narrow down to just 3, but I would say just in terms of energy and inspiration, one of the biggest things is getting enough sleep. And I think one of the biggest shifts for me in having good, consistent, inspired energy is going to bed before 10 p.m. and getting up before the sunrise and really allowing myself to be present. So I do have a morning meditation practice to be present with the sunrise and the dawning of a new day. And that might sound really cliche, but it's powerful. And the house that I live in now in Floyd, Virginia, looks out over this beautiful field where the sun rises. And so I watch the sunrise every single morning. And there's such affirmation and inspiration in that rising of the sun each day. So regardless of if you can see the sunrise from where you are, but waking up in that time In Sanskrit, it's called Brahma Muhurta. It's the time before the dawn. It's like when the veil between the human and the spiritual world is the thinnest. And every spiritual tradition or religious tradition has something that happens during that time, whether it's meditation or prayer. It's a connective time to something bigger. And I think that's really key for us as creatives, is to connect to something bigger than ourselves, so that we can be that conduit, and we can also know that we're not alone on the journey. We're part of something bigger. So can we make that 2? Go to bed before 10, get up before the sunrise. And then the other one, that this is super practical, but to make lunch your biggest meal, because it's when the solar energy is the strongest, and it's when we can make the best use of the intake that we have. And it also keeps us from having an afternoon dip, or then eating really heavy and later, which then affects our sleep and kind of sets us up to feel groggy the next day. But, empowering yourself with a really nourishing lunch, and then having an earlier, lighter dinner. Those are just some really practical tips from Ayurveda.
They're great ones. And really, in the end, if we're looking to shift, it just needs to be those little 1 degrees. We just need
Absolutely.
teeny little bits. What are some last words of encouragement that come to your mind in honor of generally supporting anyone out there who's just trying hard?
I love that. Yeah, I think really one of the things that I try to convey to everybody that I speak with is to remember you're not stuck, that everything is in a state of change always. And whether that's in your health or in your creative expression, in relationships, or whatever aspect of your life you might feel stagnant or stuck, that there's always change, and things will keep moving and exploring and expanding in your life. And we were talking earlier about this concept of the breakdown before the breakthrough. When we can get to a place where we start getting excited when we're uncomfortable, because we know that it's leading us to something that's gonna enliven our experience or enrich our lives in some way, or expand our sense of who we are. We're going to learn something really awesome, that can help us weather the times when we're not feeling the best. When we're like, okay, I'm in a dip, or I'm in a breakdown, but then we trust that things will keep evolving. And sometimes we can tend to keep ourselves in that breakdown or in the dip a little longer than we need to be, because we think that's our reality. But if we can get excited about, oh, I'm in a dip and it's leading me somewhere else, I'm not stuck, then it becomes just part of what the eventual journey is, and keep on rolling.
I want people to know that also you do a free daily yoga live on Facebook for anyone interested. It's really great. And I love how you always end with a poem.
Yeah. So every yoga class that I teach ends with a poem. And yeah, if anybody who's listening to this is interested in joining me, the group on Facebook is called Heartfelt Yoga and Ayurveda. Find that and then ask to join. And then there's almost, at this point of recording, almost 350 yoga classes there in the guides. And then I teach every morning, Monday through Friday. And they're just 35-minute classes. So they're pretty doable. So they're at 7 a.m. Eastern, but then you can watch them whenever you want to. There's all different kinds of classes there, from really active to gentle and chair yoga. So yeah, come join the fun.
Thanks for being here. And I look forward to talking to you soon. If you would like to be in touch or have someone you would love to hear interviewed, email me at afainhouse@gmail.com. I also hope that you're inspired to subscribe to this podcast. New episodes come out every Tuesday. If you would like to watch these interviews in video form and are curious about the happenings of my little business called Fain House, where I paint and make art prints and gift cards for my watercolor originals, I'd love for you to sign up for my email list. When you do, you'll get a coupon for 10% off a one-time purchase in my Etsy shop and first dibs on my annual limited edition calendar printing. You'll also be granted access to our free private Facebook group. which is the one spot you can watch these interviews. If that all sounds fun to you, go to your web browser and type bit.ly/Fainhouse to sign up. That's with a capital F and a capital H in Fainhouse. This is not a weekly newsletter, but rather a list of folks who are interested in hearing from me time to time. I'm Annie Fain Barrelon. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll leave you with a quote for the day. Do something. Start with pleasure. Make a list of all the things that are pleasurable in your life and then make an art form out of them. And if you're courageous, make a list of all the things that are difficult in your life and make an art form out of one of them. Paulus Berenson, speaking in the film To Spring from the Hand.